Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Broadcasting. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing audience in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe. Here's your host, Sloan Patton.
Thanks for joining us. Las Cruces Schools recently celebrated passing a bond vote. Our area could see a new monument here in the next few years. And the debate over the spaceport has some ready to be sent into orbit. Well, today with us, we have Republican Senator Ron Griggs from Santa Fe. Mr. Griggs, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. Well, one of the things that I just want to jump right into is the spaceport. And I know that you weren't the one to introduce the bill, but it's something that everybody seems to be talking about. What are your thoughts on the spaceport, just as a southern New Mexican?
Through the interim process, we sat and heard testimony from the spaceport folks. And one of the big issues down there that needs to be addressed, and I'm not quite sure if it's being addressed yet, is the building of the Southern Road. Mm-hmm. The Southern Road, from Las Cruces, is important to make this thing really viable, not only for Doña Ana County, but for the whole state. So it's something that we need to determine how to fund and how to build and get that behind us so we can move the spaceport ahead.
Mm-hmm. One of the bills that you've just introduced is Bill 288. That one talks about DUIs and increasing penalties for driving under the influence. How did this bill come about? Why did you decide to introduce this one?
This particular bill basically deals with, though, if you're driving drunk on a revoked or suspended license. There was a horrible accident that occurred up in the northwest part of our state where a young family, or actually a couple and their unborn child, were driving to a baby shower, and they were hit by an individual who had multiple DWIs. His license had been revoked, and he was driving drunk. And so he hit them. The little baby didn't survive. So it's a tragedy that shows that whatever we're doing as far as DWI and driving on revoked licenses, that these guys aren't getting it. They're still able to go out because right now, I think it's like it's either a 4 or 7 day mandatory jail time, and then you can get up to 364 days. But it's it's not a very tough price to pay. The new bill, my bill, will provide for 18 months in jail if you're caught driving drunk on a license that was suspended or revoked due to you driving drunk. So it's far harsher, but right now the message isn't getting out there. So we need to at least have the discussion to determine if this penalty is something we think is sufficient or should be changed in order to try to stop people from driving on these revoked licenses and causing accidents or even death. It also says that if you know or you should have known that a person had a revoked license due to a DWI and you lend your car, knowing full well that that person has that issue, and he commits some other act or is stopped for driving while driving drunk, you are then cited as well to a party to that crime, which carries a 7-day jail term for you. It's in response to things that are occurring that it seems like we're just not getting the message out that you just have to stop. And it'd be great if people would just realize that driving drunk or driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs is just a bad deal. And you just have to, you got to take some responsibility and some, grow up a little bit, act right. But you know what? People aren't. So this becomes an effort to say, you know what, if you're going to do it, we're going to penalize you for doing it.
Mm-hmm. And these, the 18 months and the 7 days, would those be mandatory sentences that a judge could never change, or someone could get off on good behavior, that sort of thing?
Well, that's correct. The the first one, the 18 months, is a 4th-degree felony, so it's mandatory. The 7 days is mandatory as well. So you're going to go to jail, and that's what you're looking at.
Okay. Does this use the regular courts, or does it go through send people to federal court to be sentenced and tried?
You know, it would go through the regular courts. It would, you know, it's not, it's a state deal. It wouldn't be a federal court.
Okay. When you were looking at introducing the bill, were there any other options when you decided on this particular language for the bill?
You know, there certainly is always other options that you could, you know, you could look at misdemeanors, different approaches there on, well, what you should do. But the truth be known, you know, you need to do something, and you need to make a statement on how it needs to be done. And so you go the harsher route, and then you talk about this in committee, and we'll determine whether the committee members believe that it's too harsh or it's just right. You know, but the fact of the matter is, when people get behind the wheel and they've been drinking and they're drunk and they're habitual because they've already got a DWI and they've had their license revoked, you know, they're a danger to our state, and we need to do those things that keep those people off the road.
Right. Well, drunk driving is certainly a huge issue in New Mexico, and we've been known for a long time for having strict laws on it. What kind of reception have you gotten from just the people that you've worked with? I know you said you haven't gone to committee quite yet, but what sort of reception have you had from fellow senators and House members on it?
Well, on this particular bill, we haven't had much discussion.
Okay.
You know, I think that that discussion will really come in committee, and so we'll see. You know, everybody recognizes the problem, I believe, and everybody looks for a solution. The question is going to be, is the penalty something that everybody can agree with?
Right. Well, tell me about the other bills that you've introduced. I know that they have to do with land in our state and the sale of that land. What's that all about?
You know, that's a fun memorial for me to carry. You know, New Mexico and all the western states have a large percentage of lands within the boundaries of our states that are controlled by the federal government. You've probably heard people discuss or talk about, we need to take that land back, because if you look over on the southeast part of the state, you look on the northwest part of the state, oil and gas revenues are tremendous, and our state gets 30-some-odd% of its general fund revenues from that. But what that is when an oil and gas well is drilled and there's a royalty paid on that particular property, it might be a 1/8, it might be 3/16, the federal government gets that money. The federal government then returns about half of that royalty payment to the state. So the state gets a little bit of it, but if you've paid attention to some of the budget discussions in Washington, you know, they're really kind of wanting to hold some of that back a little bit. So New Mexico may be shorted, as well as other western states, because the federal government is either slow in paying or they decide not to pay. So those issues are something that's ahead of us, and when we get so much of our state's operating revenues through oil and gas, you know, we need to look at other mechanisms or other ways where potentially the state could benefit. My memorial, what it does is it sets aside a program on how to take over management, not take over ownership, but take over management of all federal lands in the state of New Mexico. The federal government then, what they benefit from is they benefit from not having to have all the employees in New Mexico that they have to pay, they have to provide benefits for, they have to do whatever else it might be. But New Mexico would then assume those responsibilities. In return for that, the state of New Mexico would collect all the royalties due on oil and gas revenue, on timber sales, on whatever it might be, and then remit to the federal government 3%. And that would phase down to 1% over the next 20 years. At the end of the 20-year period, New Mexico would then assume ownership of all federal lands within the state. And I think this is an approach that is reasonable, doable, and benefits both parties. However, you know, it's one of those things. It's pretty. It's something when you haven't done it before, you haven't proposed it before. A lot of people will look at that and go, well, So what this memorial does is it says over the next interim period, the state land office, along with the energy minerals management portion of the state government, we will look at that and see genuinely if it's something that's affordable, if there's enough revenue for the state to actually gain. And nobody's really looked at that either. So this thing says that we'll take over management, but we won't do it unless the revenues are beneficial to our state.
Right. Well, and of course, with some of the oil and gas and other natural resources under the ground, I would imagine the state could stand to gain quite a bit of money from that land.
Well, consider there's there's potential for uranium up around Grants. There's timber that maybe we've dealt with horrific forest fires. Maybe New Mexico can manage that land better than the federal government can. I've got to believe we could. You know, the truth about a lot of this stuff is if you go east of the New Mexico state line, you're going to find very little federal land in the country. You go west of the eastern New Mexico line, and you're going to find a whole lot of it. So when all of these states came into the federal government, a large portion of lands were allotted to the federal government. You know, that's been over, for most of us, we're about the last one, it's been over 100 years ago. It's genuinely time to change that because we're too dependent on the federal government in too many ways. This gives us a way that maybe we can utilize our resources. California could then utilize their resources. Wyoming could use their resources in a way that they feel like is beneficial to their state. And I believe that's a better approach than having the federal government from Washington, D.C. try to dictate to you and I what is the best way we can handle the properties within our boundaries.
Right, and your title, of course, is a Republican. That's just that R goes in front or behind your name. But and a lot of Republican senators like you see the federal government as something they want to back away from. But government control is still government control for New Mexico. You know, was it tough making the decision to want to essentially, if this passes, the ownership will change hands from federal to state, but does that still place, the government in control of this private land?
Well, obviously it does. And right now it's controlled, of course, by the BLM or the Forest Service.
Right.
So it does continue government control. But, my personal feeling is the best government is the government closest to the people. So while this doesn't do everything I would like to see it do, if we can bring it back to control by the state, then we have potentially a better chance to allow it to be managed by private companies for certain things. We can maybe sell some of it to municipalities or any number of things that we can do, but we can talk to our guys right here. And I think that's far more important to us than being able to try to go talk to guys in Washington, D.C. who genuinely don't have maybe New Mexico's interest at heart that the state government does.
Well, all right. Well, so it's tough being a Republican in New Mexico. I know. I know you guys are right. It's a numbers game for sure. Well, in our area, I don't know if you read the news this morning, but in southern New Mexico, this was the newspaper this week. Las Cruces Public Schools and Gadsden Schools essentially, won the election for getting bond sales. All of those passed, and so those schools will be receiving, several $1 million to improve over the next several years, and as the bonds are paid back. What are your thoughts on education in the state, and do you see this as a good thing or a bad thing that the bonds passed?
I wish I had more familiarity with that discussion. I really don't. The committees that I serve on up here are Public Affairs and Judiciary.
Right.
Last night in Public Affairs, we did pass the governor's what everybody calls as the third grade retention bill. We passed that through Public Affairs to go to education, because that's where it really should be debated, is in education, where those individuals have a better grasp of the educational process, the educational needs in the state. It's one of those bills that I believe is important, and when you compare it line by line with the law that exists today, this bill certainly seems to be more beneficial to parents. It puts a real emphasis on rehabilitating children before they are held back. It's a positive bill, and I would just say to those who criticize it, I'd ask them have they read it, have they compared it to the current law, to be sure that when they're critical, that they're critical in the right way, or they can address the issue in a way that is knowledgeable and understands both approaches.
Mm-hmm. Well, how have things been up there in Santa Fe with the governor's budget and I know the 60% of the capital outlay money she wanted to go towards water development, water infrastructure. Has that held around that same 60%, or have you seen that change?
We'll see. We have not seen, in the Senate, we have not seen anything coming out of the House dealing with the budget. Hopefully we'll see that this week, because if we don't see it until next week, it starts making things a little tighter on everybody. But the truth is, the governor has a good approach. She genuinely does. The needs of New Mexico are great. We have road needs, we have water needs, we have all sorts of other infrastructure needs that maybe we can't piecemeal like the normal capital outlay process has done. For instance, last year, all the senators were allotted about $1.2 million for projects across their districts. Well, you really, when you look at that for just a minute, $1.2 million when a district that runs from Carlsbad to Chaparral to Alamogordo, man, that's not a lot of money. And it doesn't go near as far as you'd like to think it does. So her approach is, well, let's take capital outlay and let's focus it directly on water projects this year to see if we can catch up or move ahead on some of that.
Are there any projects in particular you think are important for southern New Mexico, that you really think we need to get this done in the next 5 years?
Well, over in Doña Ana County, I've got a big long list of capital projects. There's roads that need to be done, especially down around Santa Teresa. Chaparral, the community needs about $2.5 million worth of water and sewer. I think it's a sewer infrastructure project. You come to Alamogordo, and Alamogordo has one of the most important projects in New Mexico, and that's the reverse osmosis plant, because it would be the first in the state, and it would all show how all that could potentially work for other communities to desalinate brackish groundwater and supplement their existing supplies of water with that. So there are needs, and there are some big things, big ticket items across the state. Carlsbad is trying to move water from many miles away to augment their water supply for their community. So there's some big deal things that for southern New Mexico for Alamogordo, for Carlsbad, for Las Cruces, that we need to work hard to get done. It's just the projects far outnumber the dollars. So we'll just keep working to hopefully we can make some of those happen, and that's why the governor has taken her approach. Now, to give you another thought on this deal, I dropped a bill yesterday. It hasn't been numbered. It'll be numbered today. It deals with capital outlay as well. What it does is it says, not this year, but the next year, of the available capital outlay dollars to the legislature, which comes out, we take off the Colonias Infrastructure Fund, we take off the Water Trust Board monies, then 75% of that remaining capital dollars in my bill would be put on road projects across our state to be determined through the interim process, through the legislature working in conjunction with the governor to determine projects that are in the best interest of our state. The following year, this is a 4-year program, the following year it'd go to water projects. The year after that it would go to state buildings, and the final year it would go to road projects again to see if we couldn't catch up. The remaining 25% would then be split 50-50 between the House and the Senate, to where the House of Representatives, those members would have a much smaller amount of money, but they might be able to do some good localized projects that help there and improve the quality of life, for instance, of people in Las Cruces, Doña Ana County, or in my district, those Shirley, but also Otero and Eddy counties.
Mm-hmm. Well, for people, employers that are looking at the state of New Mexico to come and build their businesses, water's got to be something that they take a look at. It's the desert. People, it's on everybody's minds. Do we have enough? And so that's the question: is water stable enough for people to come and build their business and employ New Mexicans?
I would tell you, right off the bat that yes, it is. But, if it's a big high water user manufacturing company, well, you're going to have to certainly rethink that a little bit. But there's a lot of businesses in this part of the world or in this country that could readily come to a more stable climate in New Mexico than they have in other places. Oklahoma, the horrible tornadoes, Kansas, the horrible tornadoes, things along the river, the flooding, the weather patterns in our country are far more difficult to be in than we have in southern New Mexico. So that's one of those things that I think we need to market, is the fact that we have fantastic weather. We have great opportunities. You may indeed want to bring some of your workforce, because genuinely our workforce is limited, but we may be able to provide ancillary folks that can really help with your company. When it was announced about 2 years ago that Fidelity was going to move a big chunk of their business to Albuquerque, they were going to bring some of their people. I mean, that's just the way some of that works. But there's a lot of jobs that would be filled by New Mexicans, and that's just important. Once somebody's there, there's opportunities not only maybe with that company, but with ancillary businesses or other businesses as well.
Where do you think the future of jobs in New Mexico is?
New Mexico has a bright future. I can't, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you, who might be here and when they might come. We do have some challenges that we need to address. We need to work on liquor licensing in our state to make licenses more available. So if you're a restaurant and you want to come to Las Cruces, that you can find an affordable liquor license that allows you to be there. Because when we put up roadblocks like we do with our liquor licensing situation today, we impede business opportunity. And I think that it's important to us to sit there and say, you know what? We want businesses here. We want to give them the opportunity to be successful. We don't want to sit there and throw up roadblocks that stop you from even considering our state or our community in our state.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, with just about 2 minutes left in the show, I'd like to ask, just very, very briefly about the Organ Mountains National Monument that's being proposed. And it may be a longer debate for another day, but it seems that there are only really, about two different options. There's Representative Pierce's option that he's proposed. It's a smaller portion of the Organ Mountains, about, it's about half the size, thereabouts, than the one that Senators Udall and Heinrich are proposing. Between those two, do you have a clear choice?
Well, personally, and I haven't seen the maps, which is, I'm an old landman. I worked for Texaco buying oil and gas leases for years. One of the key things to have as a landman is a good map. But I haven't seen these. But to me, genuinely, once you take this out, once you take it out of the system, or however you want to set that up, it's liable to be gone forever. I think that Congressman Pierce's approach is probably more realistic. Although, we got to sit there and understand that, President Obama and our two senators look at it a little bit different. And it may be that that's the approach that's taken. But, I certainly think that, again, we talked about it a little bit ago. We talked about the federal government and X, Y, and Z. It would just make me more comfortable for the smaller number to be the one that's used, because it gives us the opportunity to some way have control of all the rest of it at some point in time, and not the bureaucrats, not the folks in Washington to somehow manage properties that are in our state.
Well, Senator Ron Griggs, thanks so much for taking the time. We appreciate it as always.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. I've had to fool with the earpiece a little bit so I could keep it where it needed to be. But I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, and I hope we get to do it again.
And we'll see you again next episode. Thanks again.
Your Legislators is a production of KRWG Broadcasting. Copyright New Mexico State University Board of Regents.